I never thought I'd find comfort in someone else's guilt, but there I was at 3 in the morning, sitting on the edge of my bathroom sink, while Marcus dabbed antiseptic on my split lip with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The fluorescent light made everything look harsh and clinical, but his eyes, God, his eyes were so soft I could barely stand to look at them. He kept apologizing, over and over, like a broken record, even though he wasn't the one who'd thrown the punch. Let me back up. My name's Ryan, and 6 months ago, I would have laughed if you'd told me I'd fall in love with my roommate. Not because Marcus wasn't attractive, he absolutely was, but because I'd spent most of my adult life convinced that keeping people at arm's length was the only way to stay safe. After growing up in a house where my father's rage was as predictable as the sunrise, I'd learned that vulnerability was just another word for target practice. Marcus moved in last October when my previous roommate bailed on the lease. I remember opening the door to find this tall, lanky guy with wire-rimmed glasses and a nervous smile, surrounded by cardboard boxes that looked like they'd been packed by someone who actually cared about their belongings. Everything was labeled in neat handwriting: books, kitchen stuff, winter clothes. It was such a stark contrast to my own chaotic moving style that I immediately felt both judged and intrigued. Those first few weeks, we did the polite roommate dance. Good mornings, and how was your days, and is it okay if I have friends over this weekend? He worked from home as a graphic designer, and I'd hear him on calls in his room, his voice taking on this professional confidence that disappeared the moment he stepped into our shared spaces. With me, he was quieter, more careful, like he was trying to figure out what kind of person I was before deciding how much of himself to reveal. I noticed things about him. The way he'd make coffee for both of us in the morning without asking, just remembering after the first week that I took mine black. How he'd leave little notes on the fridge when he borrowed something, always replacing it before I even noticed it was gone. The fact that he fell asleep on the couch almost every night, watching nature documentaries, his face peaceful in a way that made something in my chest ache. And yeah, I noticed that he was beautiful. Not in the obvious way that makes you do a double take, but in this quiet, unassuming way that snuck up on you. The way afternoon light caught the copper highlights in his brown hair. How his whole face transformed when he smiled. Really smiled, not the polite roommate smile, but the genuine one. The graceful way his hands moved when he was sketching, which he did constantly, always doodling in the margins of everything. I told myself it didn't mean anything. I'd had crushes before, and I was good at letting them fade into the background noise of my life. I'd dated a few guys in college, nothing serious, nothing that lasted more than a few months. I always found a reason to end things before they got too deep, too clingy, too distant, too something. The truth was, I was too scared to let anyone get close enough to really hurt me. But Marcus made it hard to maintain my carefully constructed walls. He had this way of existing in our apartment that felt like an invitation, rather than an intrusion. He'd cook dinner and casually make enough for two. He'd pause his documentary when I came home late from my job at the bookstore, asking about my day like he genuinely wanted to know. And slowly, without me quite realizing it was happening, we became friends. Real friends. The kind who knew each other's weird habits and didn't judge. He knew I had nightmares sometimes, though I never told him what they were about. I knew he called his mom every Sunday at exactly 2 p.m., and that those calls sometimes left him quiet and withdrawn for hours afterward. We developed our own rhythms, our own inside jokes, our own comfortable silences that felt more intimate than conversation. Then came the night that changed everything, though I didn't know it yet. It was a Friday in February, one of those bitter, cold nights where the wind cuts through your coat like it's personal. I'd gone out with some friends from work to a bar downtown, nothing fancy, just drinks and darts and the kind of mindless fun that helps you forget about another week of retail hell. I wasn't much of a drinker, never had been. Growing up with an alcoholic father will do that to you. But I had a couple of beers, enough to feel loose and warm, and I was having a genuinely good time. That's when I saw Derek, my ex, if you could even call him that. We'd dated for about 3 months last year, and it had ended badly. The kind of badly where you block someone's number and avoid places you know they frequent. Derek had seemed great at first, charming and attentive, but as things progressed, he'd become possessive, then controlling, then mean. The final straw was when he'd shoved me during an argument, then spent 2 hours alternating between apologizing and blaming me for making him angry. I'd walked out and never looked back. Seeing him across the bar made my stomach drop. I thought about leaving, but I was with friends, and I was tired of letting him have power over me. So I stayed, kept my distance, pretended he didn't exist. It worked for about an hour. Then he approached me at the bar, that familiar smile that used to make my heart race, now just making my skin crawl. The conversation started civil enough. "How have you been? You look good. I've been thinking about you." I kept my responses short, polite but firm. I wasn't interested in rekindling anything. That's when his tone shifted. He moved closer, too close, his hand on my arm in a way that looked casual, but felt like a threat. He suggested we go somewhere to talk. I said no. He insisted. I said no again, more firmly. That's when his mask slipped entirely. The things he said, I won't repeat them all. But they were designed to hurt, to humiliate, to make me feel small. He called me names I hadn't heard since high school, questioned my worth, my choices, my right to reject him. My friends had moved to the other side of the bar, didn't see what was happening, and I felt that old familiar feeling rising up, the one from childhood, where you freeze because fighting back only makes it worse. But something in me had changed. Maybe it was having Marcus in my life, seeing an example of what gentle strength looked like. Maybe I was just tired of being afraid, so I told Derek to back off, loud enough that people started looking. I told him to leave me alone, that we were done, that he needed to accept that. And then I turned to walk away. He grabbed my shoulder, spun me around, and threw a punch that caught me right across the mouth. The pain was immediate and stunning, stars bursting behind my eyes. I stumbled back against the bar, tasted blood. The whole place erupted. My friends rushed over. The bartender was yelling. Someone was calling the cops. Derek was being dragged toward the door, still shouting, still blaming me. I didn't press charges. Maybe I should have, but I just wanted it to be over. My friends offered to take me to the hospital, but I declined. The bleeding had mostly stopped, and I just wanted to go home. They called me an Uber, made me promise to text when I got there safely, and I spent the ride pressing bar napkins to my lip and trying not to cry. The apartment was dark when I got home. It was after 2, and I figured Marcus was asleep. I went straight to the bathroom, closed the door, turned on the light, and really looked at the damage. My lip was split and swollen, already turning purple. There was a small cut on my cheekbone where his ring had caught me. My jaw ached. I looked like exactly what I was, someone who'd been hit, and the sight of it made something break inside me. I sat down on the closed toilet lid and started to cry, really cry, the kind of sobbing that comes from somewhere deep and old and wounded. That's when I heard the knock, soft, tentative, Marcus's voice, rough with sleep. "Ryan? Are you okay?" I tried to pull myself together to say I was fine, but my voice came out broken and wrong. The door opened. I hadn't locked it, and there he was in sweatpants and an old t-shirt, his hair sticking up on one side, his face shifting from confusion to horror as he took in my appearance. What happened? Who did this? His voice was shaking, and I'd never heard him sound like that before, like he was barely holding back something huge and dangerous. I tried to explain, the words tumbling out between sobs, and he listened with his hands clenched into fists at his sides, his jaw tight. When I finished, he took a breath, then another, visibly forcing himself to calm down. Then he said, "Let me help you." He was so gentle. That's what I remember most. He washed his hands, then wet a clean cloth with warm water and carefully cleaned the blood from my face, his touch so light I barely felt it. He got the first aid kit from under the sink and dabbed antiseptic on my cuts, apologizing every time I winced. And the whole time, he kept saying he was sorry. "I'm so sorry. I should have been there. I should have protected you. I'm so sorry. It didn't make sense. He was my roommate, not my bodyguard. He had no way of knowing what would happen, no responsibility for Derek's actions. But watching his face as he tended to my wounds, I realized something that made my chest feel too small for my heart. He cared. Not in the casual way friends care, but in the deep, aching way that means someone has become essential to your existence. And maybe, just maybe, I cared about him the same way. When he finished with the antiseptic, he didn't move away. He stayed there, standing between my knees where I sat on the sink edge, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him. His hand came up to my face, trembling slightly, and his thumb brushed just below the cut on my cheekbone, so carefully it barely touched. "You didn't deserve this," he whispered. "You didn't deserve any of this." Something in the way he said it made me think he wasn't just talking about tonight, like somehow he knew about all of it, all the years of my father's anger, all the times I'd learned to make myself small and quiet and invisible. Like he could see every scar I carried, visible or not, and wanted to heal them all. I don't know who moved first, maybe both of us at the same time. But suddenly his forehead was pressed against mine, and we were breathing the same air, and the whole world had narrowed down to this tiny bathroom and the space between us that was disappearing. I could feel his heartbeat, or maybe it was my own, pounding so hard I thought my ribs might crack. "I should go," he said, but he didn't move. "I should let you rest." But his hands had moved to my shoulders, holding on like I was the only thing keeping him anchored, and I heard myself say, "Stay, please stay." He pulled back just enough to look at me, really look at me, and I saw my own fear and hope and longing reflected in his eyes. Then he leaned in and pressed the softest kiss to my forehead, then to my uninjured cheek, then to the corner of my mouth, carefully avoiding my split lip. Each kiss felt like an apology, a promise, a question, and when he finally pulled away, his eyes were wet. "I've wanted to do that for months," he said, "but not like this, never like this. I wanted our first kiss to be perfect, not when you're hurt and scared and bleeding. This isn't how it was supposed to happen." I reached up and took his face in my hands, made him look at me. "Marcus," I said, and my voice was steadier than I expected. "Nothing about my life has ever been perfect, but this, right now, you taking care of me, you being here, this feels pretty damn close." Something in his expression shifted, like I'd given him permission for something he'd been holding back. He helped me down from the sink, and we moved to the couch, and he held me while I told him everything. About Derek, about my father, about all the ways I'd learned to protect myself by never letting anyone in. And he listened, really listened, his hand running slowly up and down my back, and when I finished, he told me his story too. His parents had divorced when he was 12. His father had remarried quickly, started a new family, and Marcus had become an afterthought, the kid from the first marriage who was always slightly in the way. His mother loved him, but was drowning in her own depression, and he'd learned young to be quiet, to not need too much, to make himself easy to love because demanding anything felt too risky. He'd dated before, but never seriously, always afraid that if someone really knew him, they'd realize he wasn't worth the effort. We were both broken in our own ways, I realized, both carrying wounds that made us careful and distant and scared. But somehow, sitting there in the dark with the city lights filtering through the windows, our brokenness fit together in a way that felt like healing. He fell asleep first, his head on my shoulder, his breathing deep and even. I stayed awake, watching him, marveling at the trust it took for him to let himself be this vulnerable with me. My lip throbbed and my face ached, but I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Safe. Like maybe, just maybe, it was okay to let someone see all of me, damage and all. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight and the smell of coffee. Marcus was in the kitchen making breakfast, and when he saw me, his face lit up in a way that made my chest feel warm. Then he saw my lip in the daylight and winced. "How bad is it?" I asked. He came over, tilted my face to the light, examined me with those careful eyes. "You'll live," he said, "but you look like you went 3 rounds with a prize fighter." I laughed, then regretted it when my lips split open again. He grabbed a paper towel, pressed it gently to the bleeding, and said, "You need to be more careful." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. I'd spent my whole life being careful, and it hadn't protected me at all. Maybe it was time to try being brave instead. We spent that day together, just the two of us in the apartment. We watched movies and talked and existed in this new space we'd created, where we could be honest about what we wanted. He told me he'd been half in love with me since the first month, but he'd been terrified of ruining our friendship. I told him I'd been fighting my feelings for almost as long, convinced I'd just end up hurting him or driving him away, and we both agreed that we'd been idiots. That night, when my lip had healed enough, he kissed me properly, slowly, carefully, like I was something precious that might break. And I kissed him back, pouring everything I couldn't say into it, all my fear and hope and desperate want. When we finally pulled apart, we were both shaking. "This is real, right?" he asked. "This is actually happening?" I nodded, not trusting my voice, and he smiled like I'd given him the world. The next few weeks were a strange mix of wonderful and terrifying. We had to relearn how to be roommates, while also being something more. We had to figure out boundaries in space and how to navigate the vulnerability of letting someone see you at your worst. There were awkward moments and difficult conversations. He met my mother, who cried and hugged him and told him to take care of me. I met his mother, who looked at me with cautious hope and said she hadn't seen her son this happy in years. Derek tried to contact me a few times, apologetic messages that quickly turned accusatory when I didn't respond. Marcus wanted to confront him, to make him pay for what he'd done, but I asked him not to. "Some battles aren't worth fighting," I said. "Some people aren't worth the energy." Eventually, the messages stopped. My father called out of the blue one day, something he did maybe once a year. He was drunk, I could tell by his voice, and he wanted money. I'd always given it to him before, guilt and fear making me compliant. But this time, with Marcus sitting beside me, his hand on my knee, I said no. I said I was done. I said he needed to figure out his own life because I was finally figuring out mine, and then I hung up. My hands were shaking so hard I dropped the phone, but Marcus caught me, held me while I cried with relief and grief, and something that felt like freedom. I started therapy. It was Marcus's idea, suggested so gently I couldn't take offense. He said I deserved to heal, really heal, not just survive. And he was right. Sitting in that office week after week, talking about my childhood and my fears and my patterns, I started to understand why I'd built such high walls around myself. And I started to learn how to carefully, slowly, take them down. Marcus was patient with me. On the nights when I woke up from nightmares, he was there, holding me until my breathing calmed. When I got triggered by something, a raised voice or a slammed door, he gave me space, but stayed close enough that I knew I wasn't alone. And when I had good days when I felt strong and whole and capable, he celebrated with me like they were victories, because they were. We've been together for 4 months now, 4 months of learning how to love someone while also learning to love myself. It hasn't been perfect. We've had fights, moments where our respective damage collides in ways that hurt. But we always talk it through, always come back to each other, always choose to stay. Last week, we were lying in his bed, which has become our bed, watching the sunset through the window. My head was on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, and he was playing with my hair in that absent way he does when he's content. And he said, "I'm glad you got hurt that night." Then, realizing how that sounded, he quickly added, "Not glad you got hurt. I'd never be glad about that, but glad it brought us here, glad it made us finally stop pretending." I understood what he meant. Sometimes the worst moments crack us open in ways that let the light in. Sometimes we have to break before we can heal. And sometimes love finds us not in spite of our wounds, but because of them, two damaged people recognizing in each other the possibility of becoming whole. I think about that night a lot. The blood and the tears and the fear. Marcus kneeling in front of me in that harsh bathroom light, kissing my bruises like they were his fault, like he could absorb my pain through sheer force of caring. And I realized that's what love is, at least the kind worth having. It's not about perfect moments or grand gestures. It's about someone seeing you at your absolute worst and choosing to stay. It's about gentle hands and patient hearts and the courage to be vulnerable, even when every instinct screams at you to protect yourself. My lip healed, the bruises faded, but the tenderness Marcus showed me that night, that stayed. It became the foundation of everything we built together. And every day, in small ways and large, he shows me that I'm worth caring for, worth protecting, worth loving. And slowly, I'm starting to believe him.